You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week we bring you important and very useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And I just want to thank everybody for all their support. So many of you are taking our podcasts or our links and sending them on to family and friends. And that's how our listeners are growing each and every day. And I think you're doing that because we have some great guests. I'm not going to disappoint you today. We have another great guest. So for those of you that don't know, you could listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, pretty much all the various podcast stations. Or you could go directly to our website at boomerstodayradio.com and listen as well. So again, thank you for all your support. We have with us today Joan Price. Joan calls herself an advocate for ageless sexuality. She has been called other things by the media: senior sexpert, the woman leading a sex revolution for seniors, and her favorite, wrinkly sex kitten. Joan is the author of 4 books about senior sex, including the award-winning Naked at Our Age, Talking Out Loud About Senior Sex, and Sex After Grief, Navigating Your Sexuality After Losing Your Beloved. An internationally popular public speaker and sex educator, Joan has been writing and speaking about senior sex since 2005. Joan, welcome to Boomers Today. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Frank. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, really. I think this isn't a subject matter that normally we would be talking about, but I think it's an important one. So, maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you started to write and speak about senior sex.
Sure. Well, this is actually my 3rd career. I was a high school English teacher for 22 years, and then I sought a career in health and fitness and as a writer. So I did that for I don't know how many years. Then at age 57, I fell in love with a man who was 64. We had both had a long time of single life after marriages, and we fell in love. We were having the most incredible relationship psychologically and sexually that we could have imagined. And we thought, wait a minute, the older we get, the better this gets. And how did this happen? And why is it a secret? So to make a long story short, as they say, I started writing about older age sexuality. I thought I was going to do one book, better than I ever expected, Straight Talk About Sex After 60, which came out when I was 61 and Robert was 68. But that was just the beginning. I found this was a topic that people wanted to learn about, wanted to talk about, and wanted to read about. So I've been doing this work now for 17 and a half years. Now I'm now 78 and a half, and there's no sign of slowing down because people really want this information. Yeah. Unfortunately, tragically, I lost Robert to cancer in 2008, which is the reason that my latest book is called Sex After Grief. That sort of brings you up to date.
Yeah. So tell us about that book, Sex After Grief. Tell us more about what led up to that. You kind of explained you lost your husband, and so talk to us. I mean, is that kind of you're finding with people that after losing a loved one, then sex actually gets better after that, or not necessarily?
No, it is very complex, and it is wrought with emotion and ambivalence. Sometimes we're numbed. Sometimes we're horny. it's impossible to grasp sometimes what our brains and our bodies are going through. But here's the thing: when I lost Robert, I read about every grief book I could find, and then again later, after you don't get over grief, but you get through it. And I was again dating, and I was looking back at what I had had to do in my own life with my own emotions in order to arrive at a point where I could find joy again. Oh, it took years. This was not a swift process. And I thought, why are there no books that guide us through this part of our lives? I looked again at all the grief books. They didn't mention sex. If they did mention sex, rarely did they even say the word. It was just to warn us that we would regret anything we did impetuously. There was no real information. Well, what do you do? We're sexual beings. Our life force eventually emerges and says, hey, look at me. So why do they leave this out of the grief books? So I decided, okay, here's the supplement. Here's a supplement you all need. It's a small book, but it's just packed through of how you evaluate, or is it time to get back into dating or sex? Is it, if you're feeling ambivalent about it, that's okay. That's realistic. How do you know when it's time? What do you do when it's time? Do you wait until you are ready for a new relationship? What if that never happens? What if you just want a companion who is also sexual? Or how do you navigate your sexuality after the person you want to have sex with has died? That's in essence what that book is.
Yeah.
And I took what I've learned over my own personal journey. I also invited other grievers to talk to me about their experiences, and those are in the book. And I also asked some experts in various fields that were related to this to weigh in on it. And so the result is a small book that's just packed with information, step by step. What do you do? How do you negotiate dating? How much do you tell someone? And I'll shut up and let you ask questions.
It's great what you're saying. I'm just, I'm curious. And again, I don't want to give away everything in the book, but do you find that the people going through this grieving process, that with sex, it has helped them with that process? Or do some feel guilt? Are they feeling guilt? Kind of whatever the various emotions.
There are so many emotions. Yes, I've heard from a lot of people after they read the book saying, thank you. Thank you. I saw myself in it. I understand better what's going on. But there are many conflicting emotions. There is, as you mentioned, guilt. It's sort of survivor's guilt. My spouse had died, or my partner has died, and how am I betraying my vows to my partner if I invite someone else into my life and into my body?
Right.
And one of the points I make is that even if you promised each other fidelity for the rest of your life, that meant the rest of your life together. That did not mean the rest of your life forever and ever when we don't have each other. Mm-hmm. And if you think about, what would your partner want for you? Would your partner want you to numb yourself, to become devoid of love and sensuality and touch? Or would your partner want you to live again? I was very lucky because Robert said to me when he knew he was dying, live fully. You have so much you have so much love to give. Right. And another person who confided in me that his dying wife said to him Don't become a hermit. Go out and live again. And I think if our partners are given the chance, if they know they're dying, they know they're leaving us, they'll tell us that. And I would love to say for those listeners who have their partners alive, to talk about this, to say, I know this is a horrible thing to imagine, but one of us will die first. What do we want for the others? What do we want to say now while we can, that the other person can remember later after one of us is gone? That would be such a gift to do that.
Right.
Because so many people who do feel guilt, they feel guilt because they never had that conversation. They think, oh my gosh, I'm being judged by my spouse who is watching from on high and saying, what do you mean you're interested in sex with someone else? Don't I mean anything to you anymore? And the answer is yes, you mean the world, and you're gone, and I'm alive, and somehow I have to go on. And if you want me physically healthy as well as mentally healthy, you will approve of my moving forward.
Those that you've talked to, whether it be your own experience or experience of others, how are the children reacting to this? Yeah, talk to
Yeah,
I'm
that's the
sure
right
that might take the
question.
rest of our show, but I was just curious
Yes.
as to
Well,
reaction. Yeah.
that's the hard part, where the children who are grieving, the adult children usually who are grieving, if they see mom or dad dating again, they'll think, wait, my parent is barely cold in the ground. This happens, and it's really, really heartbreaking, because some of the times the surviving parent was the caregiver of the ailing parent before that person died. And this person, the parent, the griever, I'll say the griever, the bereaved, has been grieving for years before the spouse died. Even if it was sudden, even if this wasn't the case, at a certain point, and you see, the timeline for everyone is different. That's one of the big issues in this book, is we can't put anyone on a timeline. You have to wait a year before you're interested in someone else, or you have to wait 10 years, or you have to wait till the children are over it, or it's inappropriate anyway. You have to wear widow's weeds for the rest of your life, and that's that. No, that's not that. What is true is we all have individual timelines for when we want to start dabbling in dating, or in just not being so lonely every minute of the day or night. We have needs that may be sexual, but they're also emotional. I know when I was going through this, I felt, I want a man's voice in my life. I want a man's laughter. I want those warm words said in a special way to me, not just turning on the radio and hearing Frank. I want my person's voice.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense to you.
No, absolutely.
But we all have our own timeline, and it may be months, it may be a year, it may be years, but no one can tell us when it's time to move on. Not our children, not our best friends. No one can tell us when it's time. It's up to us.
Yeah. I would think that just because of statistics, that the females outlive the males, that you're probably dealing more often with the females after their husband has passed. But I'm sure it's the opposite as well.
It's both.
Yeah, it's both. Do you find it quite different in dealing with a man who just lost a wife versus the opposite?
I don't like to generalize, but I sort of will, that just in my experience of the people who come to me for advice, and I also do personal consultations for people who want to just talk to someone who won't judge them. I get that all the time. I want someone to talk to, who will understand me, who won't judge me. Do you have time? And I do that. But what I find more often than not is that the men really don't like being alone.
Mm-hmm.
And they're ready faster, usually. I mean, there are some men who aren't. I don't want to say this is true for all. Nothing is true for everyone.
Right.
But in my experience, the men have been ready faster. The women have been ready more slowly, but they have been yearning all this time. It isn't that they thought, oh, it just occurs to me. I haven't had a naked hug in 5 years. I wonder if it's time. That's not what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Both genders, all genders, start thinking about the naked hug way before they act on it.
Right. Okay, good. So we're going to take a real quick pause here just to recognize our sponsor, I promise. It'll be short. And when we come back, I love to talk about some of the myths about sex and grieving. So when we come back, we'll talk about that. Well, Senior Care Authorities Beyond Driving with Dignity is a facilitated self-assessment program for older drivers. So if you know anybody that may be concerned about an older driver, this program has been designed to serve as a vital tool to facilitate older drivers and their families as they make appropriate decisions regarding the future of one's safe driving career. If the individual is a safe driver, an advisor will provide him or her with strategies on how to remain a safe driver as they progress through the aging process. If driving retirement is the appropriate decision, then the individual and their family are offered possible alternatives, resources, and a specific plan to ensure a smooth and successful transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So to learn more, you can go to www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com, or you could call 877-907-8841 to connect with a Senior Care Authority advisor in your area. We're back with Joan Price, who is an award-winning author, Naked at Our Age, talking out loud about senior sex and sex after grief, navigating your sexuality after losing your beloved. So Joan, maybe we could talk about some of the myths regarding sex and grieving. Oh,
Absolutely.
before we do, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Why don't you just, so we don't run out of time at the very end or something, why don't you share with people where they can reach you, website, anything you would like to share?
Oh, of course, I'd love to. You can find me at joanprice.com, JOANPRICE.com, and everything's there. My books, my webinars, consultations, anything you would want to find is at joanprice.com.
Great. All right, so now back to the myths about sex and grieving. Yeah.
So the myths are really powerful because we're in a vulnerable position. We don't know who we are anymore, and yet people are coming down on us, judging us with shame or worrying about us because of our personal choices or delaying the personal choices. And they're going to come on with, you have to believe it, they are myths, not truths. For example, it's not really sex you're missing, it's touch. Hug a friend or get a massage. And the truth is that sometimes, sure, you're missing touch, but you're also missing sex, touch plus arousal plus orgasm. Myth, wait at least a year before having sex with a new partner. Well, the truth is, sex is comforting. It's an outlet for your powerful emotions and needs. If you want to have sex soon after your beloved's death, even the day after the funeral, I know I'm going to worry people with that, but I have heard that from people. The 1-year rule is useful for major decision making. Don't move in with someone. Don't marry again. Don't scramble your finances. But when you have sex with a new partner, is entirely up to you and your willing sex partner. Myth, sex with someone new is disloyal, to your deceased loved one. And we talked about that before.
Right.
That's survivor's guilt, and it's powerful, but it's a myth. Wait until you're sure this new person is a potential next mate before having sex. This depends on your personal belief system. If you have firm religious convictions that only allow for sexual expression within marriage, then okay. But otherwise, and this is most of us, screening a possible sex partner as a potential next spouse will create impossible hurdles for you, for that person, and probably send potential dates running who would otherwise be pretty wonderful in your life. Then the opposite myth, you need to get out there and you should have started dating by now. People do that also. They'll say we're dating too soon, we're waiting too long. All of this is a myth. And one of the most powerful myths, you should wait until you're no longer grieving. You won't no longer be grieving. Loving someone new can coexist with grieving someone you still love. They can happen in the same time. And it's really wonderful if you are dating someone who is also a griever, because then this expands how you can connect with this person. Not a requirement, because that makes the dating pool that much smaller. But I found personally that dating another bereaved person was the key for me in being able to love again.
Interesting. That's great. So I've got a question that, we talked a little bit about this, but dealing with adult children. Okay. Do you think it's a good idea to maybe, after the loved one, the spouse has passed, you give it some time, and then when you think you're ready, before you do, maybe have that conversation with the adult children so there's no surprises? What do you think about that?
It's hard to know. It really depends on the relationship that you have with your adult children. If you're used to sharing your emotions honestly and candidly, and so are they, then it would be an honor to them to confide in them with this. And maybe even give them a copy of this book and say, here, read this to see what I'm going through. If, on the other hand, they've never wanted to know anything about your intimate life and they don't want you to know about theirs, and it just isn't a subject that comes up, you may want to treat it as your own business. It really depends on how you get along with your adult children. If you feel they're going to judge you and they're going to find out, maybe you're in a small town and you live in the same town rather than 3,000 miles apart, and they're bound to find out, then maybe it's a good idea to talk to them and say, I am still grieving and I am a human being. I have emotional needs. I have physical needs. I had a discussion with your father, for example, while he was alive. He gave me his blessing. And I need to share with you that I will never stop loving your father. I will never stop missing him. I will never stop acknowledging him as my great love in my life. But I am going to start dating again, because I am lonely and I am sad. And I know that the comfort of another human being would help me, and surely you would want that for me. Something like that. I mean, it really depends on whether that would be a conversation you could have with your adult children.
Yeah.
Some things you can say if they insist, no, you mustn't. It's inappropriate. It's wrong. Dad would hate it. You can always say one of these things to your adult children as well as to anyone else who challenges your choices. I grieved a long time while my partner was ill. It's time for me to live again. Or I'm moving forward in my own timetable. This doesn't need fixing. Or I'm sorry, but I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions and I must do that. Or I know you're concerned about me, but you don't need to be. If they still are on your case, you can always say, we have differing opinions about what I should do, or I'll let you know if I need your advice.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to do that. I hope your adult children will have that conversation with you. I hope your adult children would be able to say, I get it now. I want you to be happy. I will support you. Or I want you to be happy, but I'm sorry, this makes me so unhappy. I don't want to hear about it. We'll agree that you go your way without my hearing about it unless it becomes serious. That's another way.
Got it. So, Joan, we have just maybe a couple minutes left. Time flies. Great information. And instead of me asking the question, I'm going to just turn it over to you and just any words of wisdom to our listeners who may be going through this right now after a passing of a loved one, or maybe they're thinking about it because a loved one is about to pass and it's going through their head. What words of wisdom do you have?
One of the biggest things that people worry about is that they have to go from not having had sex with anyone but their spouse for 45 years, say, to suddenly doing it all with a new person that they don't know and doesn't know you and doesn't know what you like. And you don't know if you're going to stop and cry in the middle and not be able to go through with it, which can happen. That happened to me. So I want to say it's not all or nothing. And that's an important chapter in the book. It's called It's Not All or Nothing. You can start with, saying to someone that you've started dating, that you feel attracted to and you feel comfortable with, I'm not ready to go what we all used to call all the way, in quotes, but I'd love to just kiss for a while and see how that feels to me. Would you be willing to do that with me? Or maybe I loved kissing you and I would like to touch in a moderate way. Can we start, and you know that I can call a halt at any moment and you'll be fine with that? Can you agree to that ahead of time? In other words, talk, use your words, figure out what you need at this moment. Won't be the same as a month from now or a year from now, but at this moment, what do you need? How do you ask for it? And if someone can't handle it, that is not the person you want to take your clothes off for.
Right. Well, good. Well, everybody got to check it out. JoanPrice.com, JoanPrice.com. A lot of great information and her books. Joan, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Frank.
Yeah, great information. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Please be safe out there, and we'll talk to everybody next week.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.